The Women in the Park by Lucy Edmiston. The group was much smaller than last time. I supposed most of the mums had decided against battling the snow with their toddlers and buggies for the sake of a 45-minute story time. But 4 of us waited for the group leader to arrive. 3 sat cross-legged in a circle on the floor, their small children piling foam cushions in a corner. And me. It was only my second time, and I sat a little away from them, my baby asleep in her pram. During a pause in their hushed conversation, a phone vibrated with a message. "Oh, it's Carol," one announced. "Says the traffic's bad. Won't make it for at least half an hour. She's asking if we want to wait." Persuading their little ones back into coats and boots was unappealing, not to mention the soggy trip home. "Might as well wait now we're here," was the rippling decision. After a few more minutes of sitting alone, I ventured, "Do any of you know that woman in the park? The one who just walks laps with her pram? I must see her there every day." With shifting eyes, a silent agreement seemed to be made among the 3 women. "We know her," one said. They widened their circle so I could join them, and began to tell me this story. The first time Mary saw her was in November. The park was pale grey and muffled under a cotton wool sky. The muted atmosphere typical, but new to her, a brink of winter morning. The 2 women moved towards each other at a new mother's pace, following the circuit that Mary would come to tread hundreds of times. She had surprised herself at how fluidly she had moved from feed to nappy to change and round again. It had almost been easier without her husband hovering. It had taken 2 hours, but Mary had made herself a coffee, changed out of her pyjamas and washed, and made it outside into the world that now felt so entirely different. It was also their first solo outing. Esme was asleep, and Mary could barely take her eyes off her except to follow the path, highly alert to any potential dangers. Errant sticks under the wheels, dogs off leads, swooping magpies. Trying to ignore these intrusive thoughts, she focused on her daughter. The small round face and plump cheeks that quivered slightly over the rough path, the sheeny eyelids that flickered gently in light sleep. Not a crease, not a wrinkle, just 13 days of peace. Looking up, Mary could see the approaching mother doing the same, her head tilted downwards in an adoring gaze. Almost at the point of passing, at the curve around the playground, Mary prepared to smile, eager to try out the newly earned conspiratorial smile of the mother coven, wordless and solidary. As the path shortened, she noticed the oncoming pram was enormous, somewhere between a small sailing boat and a supermarket shopping trolley. All wheels and hood. A vintage statement, but how unwieldy and impractical, Mary thought. She also observed that the mother was faultlessly period too. 60s or 70s in dress, immaculately put together. The woman's heavily lashed eyes remained downcast under a weighty blonde fringe, blow-dried to a gleaming curve. A wide bottle-green band held her coif in place. Self-consciously, Mary tucked a loose hank of her own hair behind her ear. Mary didn't smile. She gawped at the woman, her thin legs in black stockings, her knee-length skirt and peacoat both in the darkest blue, almost black. Then the woman raised her eyes and beamed at Mary, a bright-eyed, full-volume smile. Its radiance fluttered down to settle for a second on Esme, and then the woman looked back up and continued walking on. On a small blue sofa, Mary sat in the middle room. She thought of it as the middle room, but it was probably known as the dining room in the terraced houses either side of hers. There was a table, but they hadn't eaten at it yet. It was pushed up against the interior wall where a fireplace had once been. On the table, Esme was asleep in her Moses basket, surrounded by piles of books. Under it, the remaining cardboard boxes from their move almost a year ago. There was a coziness about this room, snug between the living room and kitchen, especially in the quiet of the December dawn. The window looked onto the yard, dark right now. A garden had been one of Mary's non-negotiables when they decided to leave London and move north, something their old flat had lacked. However, that non-negotiable had been negotiated. But before becoming too cumbersome, she had laid some paving in the spring and planted bright shrubs in pretty ceramic pots. They had all withered now. Pregnancy had been uncomfortable for Mary, particularly at night. Extra pillows and repositioning, restless leg syndrome, and up and down to the loo. James had moved into the spare room at around week 25 and hadn't moved back. Just then, he came thundering heavily down the stairs and Esme started in her sleep, her arms and legs shooting out into a star shape, bracing herself for an imagined fall. Mary rose and followed James into the kitchen. She passed him his flat white and his to-go cup and attempted a kiss. "Did you brush your teeth?" Mary took a step back, self-consciously covering her mouth. "I'd better go. I'll be back late tonight. Friday work drinks." He smoothed his creaseless work shirt and was out the front door. Mary glanced at the kitchen clock, shrinking a little from the lonely hours of feeding and changing ahead. She exhaled heavily and wondered just how many words she had spoken since leaving the hospital a month ago. Leaning against the kitchen counter, she stared at her reflection in the glass of the French doors. As soon as they had moved in, she had had them installed. The house lacked natural light. She was considering brushing her teeth, maybe brushing her hair, when a glint in the morning twilight caught her eye. Then a flutter of black and white. A magpie, trying to maintain balance on the short bird feeder peg, was thrashing and rasping wildly. Wings outstretched, feathers pointing in all directions like long, pale fingers. Its beak stabbed through the feeding hole at the stony seeds and frozen mealworms inside. But it wasn't the seeds it was after. Something shiny was tucked inside. As the pendulous feeder swung, something glimmered silver. The bird pecked and flapped and cackled and swung, a grappling chaos. Mary raised a hand to bang on the window but stopped short. Its prize finally extricated, the magpie hopped prideful onto a branch of the leafless pear tree and held the treasure in its beak. The rising sun reflected off it. A ring. A silver wedding band. And in a flurry of petrol green and blue, off it flew. Instinctively, Mary checked her ring finger. Still there. She decided when Esme woke up, they'd go to the park. On Christmas Day, Mary cooked a chicken, a few carrots, peas and potatoes. While stirring the gravy made from granules, she took the tea towel off her shoulder, held it over her face and stifled her exhausted sobs. There was no cauliflower cheese or Yorkshire puddings, and she'd forgotten to buy Christmas crackers. Esme had been unusually unsettled the last few days. The night before, Christmas Eve, had felt hopeless. Esme refused to be fed. She would not be put down. Sleep came in snippets for her, but Mary was too afraid to close her eyes in case the rest was taken away too soon. After wiping her nose and cheeks on the cloth, Mary slopped the gravy into the jug and carried it through to the middle room. With boxes lurking between their legs and the bowl of peas and potatoes balanced on a pile of books, they sat at the dining table to eat. Halfway into their austere meal, James's phone vibrated. Mary noticed the word work flash up on the screen. Without looking up, James put down his fork and flipped his phone over screen down on the table. Mary looked at his hands. Large hands, but not necessarily strong. Smooth with office work and privilege. The nails neatly clipped. Taken care of. "What?" he said when he caught her staring. "You're not wearing your ring." The next day, despite the grey drizzle, the park was full with families. Mary had always preferred Boxing Day, even when she was a little girl. The performance of Christmas Day over, the awkward roast dinner tense with too many Guinnesses and slurred criticisms, was done for another year. Boxing Day was a sigh of relief. Mary would play quietly in her room while her mother read, her father upstairs in hungover sleep. In the park today, children were dressed in soft new woolly hats and matching scarves. They zipped past on shiny scooters and chased each other in a mayhem of tig. Mary and Esme circled the park, dodging the excitement. When they reached the playground fence, Mary stopped and imagined herself in a few years' time pushing her 3-year-old on the swing. She started as a magpie disturbed her idle daydream, flapping to a landing on the railing in front of her. "Where's your ring?" Mary asked. "Merry Christmas," came a softly spoken voice. Mary turned and was almost blinded by the woman's winter-white smile and that halo of blonde hair. She drew closer with her coach-like pram, the great hood shielding any view of the inside. "Merry Christmas," Mary echoed. "Lovely earrings. Silver. Were they a Christmas gift?" Her eyes slid from the earrings to Esme. Mary was mesmerised by her voice and gentle manner, motherly and cocooning. "Oh no," she managed. "I've had them ages. I hardly ever wear them." That smile again. "And what did he give her?" she asked, her gloved hands clasped in delight, glittering eyes fixed on Mary's baby. "Well, as she's still so small, we just agreed that—" A sudden shunt from behind caused Mary to look away. Behind her, a 4-year-old was standing sheepishly astride his balance bike, a panicked parent catching up and apologising for the collision. Mutely waving the incident off, Mary turned back to the conversation, but the woman and her pram were already disappearing around the bend in the path. The night before New Year's Eve, Esme was inconsolable. It had already been a sleepless week of unending tears and screams. James's slew of work drinks and office parties had left her isolated in a milky reflux misery.
Brill.
Esme lay on her back in the bedside crib, bawling and scratching. Every 4 seconds, her face fully illuminated by the red glow of the throbbing nightlight. Desperate, Mary got up. She paced the tight corners around the bed and back again with Esme wriggling in her arms. She bounced and shushed. She kissed her wet cheeks and begged her to please stop crying. Esme just cried harder. A panic started to rise, a physical sensation of being in a room that was so crowded breathing was impossible, so loud nothing could be heard. One hand on the banister, one elbow braced against the wall to steady herself, Mary slid down the slim channel of steep stairs. At the front door, she pulled on James's parka coat and felt in the pocket for the keys. Yes. And there was something else. Mary's fingers moved over the smooth sides and 4 rounded corners. Rectangular, like a credit card. She drew it out and held it up to her face in the dim light of the hall. A key card. The name of a hotel printed on it. But before she had time to consider it, Esme's howls took them outside, onto the icy pavement. The last street light before the park gate was blinking. Ahead, the full expanse was midnight black, as though the park itself wasn't even there. Nevertheless, Mary hurried ahead. They circuited once, twice. Mary's fingers lost feeling, Esme screaming unceasing. Exhausted, Mary stopped to sit on the bench. The glow from the distant industrial park casting light and shadow in patches around them. The wooden bench was damp and unpleasant beneath her, spreading through the parka and the thin layer of her pyjamas. She slipped her untethered breast into Esme's mouth. Then, the stillness she had prayed for came, but it only magnified the sudden freezing hostility of the park. To distract herself, Mary began twisting her wedding band around her finger and started counting in a whisper. 1 for sorrow, 2 for joy, 3 for a girl. At the end of the rhyme, she started again, turning and chanting, 4 for a boy. Then, in the wicked quiet, snow began to fall. 5 for silver, 6 for gold. She heard a steady movement coming along the loose stones of the path. A long, smooth, approaching crackle, punctuated by a rhythmic squeak of age and rust. Through the soft flurry of snowflakes, Mary could just distinguish a figure cloaked in black, pushing that bathtub pram. 7 for a secret never to be told. Esme screeched back into animation, the shrillness piercing the static night. Her small face suddenly infernal with rage, her toothless mouth wide and cave-black with a tongue quivering in an unending trill. She squeezed her eyes tightly into sore creases and her back arched as if galvanised. The women stopped at their bench. From within her heavy hood, just her smile was visible, entrancing. Slowly, she reached her impossibly long arms out towards Mary. "Come," she said gently. "Come." Mary rose to her as Esme shrieked and struggled, her little arms and legs scrabbling and grabbing at hair and buttons. "Let me." Mary allowed the women to lift her baby from her. "There, there," the women cooed. "I've got you." Esme fell quiet as she was laid inside the dark, vaultish pram. "I've got you now." Mary slumped back onto the bench, her breasts loose and numb at her waist, heaving sobs that hung in the air. She watched as the woman took her pram and walked away. Soon, they were both obscured by the falling snow. In the hall, a slow prickle crawled over my skin as questions met with answers. "Pram is empty?" I asked, needing absolute confirmation. One of the women nodded sadly. "It's insane," another said, shaking her head. "I mean, what's she doing? Is she looking for her daughter? Has she just not accepted that she's gone?" "This should have been their 3rd Christmas together," offered the last. "They might even have come to this very group." I stood to leave, propelled by an impulse to take my baby home. I snatched my bag and hurried across the hall. But before I could reach the entrance, the door creaked open. I hoped to see Carol with her shopping bag stuffed with puppets and coloured scarves. Instead, a watery trail in its wake, in hopped a snow-wet magpie. I flinched as it fluttered past onto a nearby chair and curled its ebony claws around the backrest. From its perch in the centre of the room, the bird tilted its head to fix on my pram with a greedy eye.
You've just heard The Woman in the Park, a ghost story for Christmas by Lucy Edmiston, part of Ghosts at the Old Library with music by Oscilloscope, made possible by funding from the Arts Council and creative director Richard V. Hirst.